Spread the fire, Ayeye, and welcome back to SMWX. So excited today to be joined by Verashni Pillay, who is a South African journalist, the founder of explain.co.za, and has just like edited everything that's ever existed in South Africa as well. Thank you so much.
Not quite, but it's very kind of you.
It's so good to have you on SMWX finally.
Well, I feel like I'm the super excited one because I've been following you guys from like pre-day one. Like as soon as you made that announcement, I was like, subscribe, and
that's so
cool.
I
love all things media innovation, and I have a lot of respect for you. And I think I've told your partners how I promptly started stalking them, to find out who was behind this amazing initiative. So yes.
Well, it's a great honor to have you. And see, we know people in high places now, people in high places on the channel. Have you joined the WhatsApp channel? If not, like, where even are you? Like, what are you even doing? But Verashni, there's never a dull day in South African politics.
No.
And we got a bombshell recently that Deputy President David Mabuza is postponing his moment in cabinet to, quote, clear his name. What was your immediate reaction, and how do you think the analysis of this moment has played out?
So I really struggled with the analysis of it. I felt there was a lot of guesswork going around about why he was doing what he was doing, which is a feature of political journalism in South Africa, understandably so. So much happens behind closed doors. But I kind of wish that I was hearing from people who were really embedded in having reported on someone like Mabuza. Someone like Sizwe Yamasenda, I hope I'm saying his name right, but basically the guy who was the Mpumalanga reporter for City Press for a long time. And he's written a whole book about Mabuza's time in Mpumalanga. I mean, this is a province where you will remember that people were assassinated, whistleblowers were assassinated. I mean, things got so dark in that province. And, there was a New York Times massive front page article that was done in August last year about how Mabuza was, implicated in a scandal where funds were just taken and siphoned off from public schools, leaving the public schools themselves in disarray and his pockets much more the richer. So I kind of wish that I was hearing from an expert who could tell me more about how Mabuza has worked before. How does this compare with his previous power plays? Should we buy the story that he's going to clean up his image before the Integrity Commission? I mean, no one's actually seen this list that everyone keeps talking about. Was it really that important for him to do that? I would like to know how this fits in with the idea of MPs having to declare. Is that something that perhaps played a role? So yeah, I spent a lot of time yesterday researching and reading what was out there, and I didn't feel that that informed.
Yeah, what was surprising for me is that we were at Parliament in the precinct, and so many of the politicians that we spoke to also literally genuinely seemed surprised as well. And it seems that
at Mabuza's decision.
Yeah, and ANC politicians. And so it does seem to have completely wrong-footed some people in the ANC as well as some people in the media. And I don't know, for me it's like, on the one hand, the New Dawn narrative is claiming this as a victory. President Ramaphosa is getting tough. And I must say, this is the first time where I'm like, whoa, is something actually happening here?
But is it? Because if he was caught unawares, although maybe he wasn't. But I like what you said about everyone being so like, what just happened? Because that's exactly what happened at NASRAC, right? I think you mentioned this previously, actually.
Right.
The fact that we were like, whoa, he just switched camps. So much for the Premier League. So I think the Ramaphosa kind of theory could take this as a win, but I'm not sure if they knew it was coming.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I guess he's proved a really strategic political thinker in terms of the ability to sacrifice, which is what I think he did at NASRAC, quote unquote. And here, one would think, okay, you've got the deputy presidency, that's the logical step, but he seems to have taken a step back from that, and one can only imagine what the next step will be from that. So it'll be fascinating to watch.
I mean, absolutely, because the fact is that he can't become a deputy president for the next year, because he would need to be sworn in as a parliamentarian to become deputy president, and the IEC only allows that a change to those lists once a year.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. Right.
So this is what's been bothering me, on this whole journey I've been on creating my own thing, is really wanting to understand.
Explain.co.za.
It's all in the name. Trying to understand things. So people, like with the Mabuza thing, there was another theory going around people who had also stepped down, like Malusi Gigaba from becoming a parliamentarian rather, is that they were trying to save their pensions, and I couldn't find any information to back that up publicly. And I've put questions through to the Government Employment Fund I'm waiting for answers to see where does that theory come from.
Well, I think this is a really interesting intersection between someone who is a major player at a provincial level who's now risen to the national level, and maybe us taking our eye off the ball on developments that happen below national politics. Take us through your thoughts on the importance of digging deeper, particularly in local and provincial politics, to understand what's going on around us.
Yeah, so as someone who's been a journalist for many years and always been quite in love with it and worked at some amazing publications, it always was the national story. It always was the national personalities. Even for local elections, as much as we would tell people, oh, you know, think about the policies, it would be about the personalities. And that's fine at a national level, but when you get to the local government elections, it gets, for me, quite farcical in that we don't really unpack what is going on in local government more. And I find this really tragic because I keep saying this to everyone, the rubber hits the road when it comes to service delivery at a local level. So we could talk, like we did, endlessly about the money, the 220 million rand that was spent on Nkandla, and that's very important. At the same time, what is your councillor's name? That's something, like, so I have this dream where I want to go up to like random South Africans and be like, what is your councillor's name? And they know that person, because the amount of pressure we were able to put on a national government pales in comparison to what we could do to a local figure who's directly accountable to us. If we all knew our councillor's name, we could get so much more done. Because we've proven that we are not apathetic as a country. It's just that I feel there is a paucity of information to empower citizens, and not just citizens in elite places and centres like metros and urban centres. And that's kind of my big driving thing, is that we do need more of those stories of what's happening on the ground in people's lives outside of Johannesburg and Cape Town and Durban. And even in places like Johannesburg, for instance, I was amazed at how little there was about this landmark coalition government that was working or was functional and stable between the EFF and the DA in the city of Joburg. There was so little analysis on it, even though it was a first in South Africa. I mean, we've had coalition governments in cities before, but none with two parties so ideologically completely diverse.
And it's a good point that you make, because I remember the reporting when those governments came together was like, these are going to fall apart in a matter of weeks. There's no way this can hang together. And there hasn't been a lot of thinking about
going back to that, right?
Right.
And even though two of those coalitions did fall apart in Nelson Mandela Bay and in Swane, and this is something I tackled in one of my videos to say, why did this one work? And there was reporting on it. For instance, Amabungani did 2 articles, and I know that the reporter behind that, one of the reporters being Mike Reddy, was someone who really wanted to explore this further. But having worked with Amabungani previously and investigative journalism previously, you can put out the hottest scoop, or what you think is an important story, but it will sink like a lead balloon if the public isn't interested. And there was a real sense for me that the public wasn't particularly interested in this local government story that's actually pretty important. It's the city of Joburg. It's like kind of the heartbeat of the country economically.
I suppose in some ways we glamorize national politics, and local politics is just kind of presented in this boring way. But if anything, there's like super intriguing stuff going on there, the stories that we need to tell, that I think if we got as invested in those as the national picture, it would only really add to the depth of our understanding.
Well, I actually like what you're saying there, because I think I'm being a bit school momish and being like, we should all care more. But I think perhaps I should ask myself, why don't we care more? Because it's human. I mean, I'm trying to do this thing where I'm bringing in comedians to help me tell the news, because I want people to like legitimately care. But for instance, people did care about Mashaba's utterances around, foreigners and things like that. But again, I feel like it's spectacle. We're very interested in spectacle. So when he put out a massive sort of tender to bring in private developers into the city of Joburg to redevelop property that had been expropriated because people had just, fled from the city centre, during the kind of like Swart Gevaar, just after democracy. And it was an interesting project from so many angles, because there was a danger that it could turn into what happened in Cape Town with gentrifying the inner city and then forcing out the poor. And organizations like SERI were very concerned about that. But I would have thought South Africans would have been more interested in that, but they weren't. So it was like, conversations on the sort of like periphery between SERI and these kind of activists around what he was doing. But it went ahead, the tender went ahead. And then people will then, on the other hand, slam Mashaba, and I certainly have been one of them for some of his utterances and what he does and what he stands for. But at the same time, if you look at the city's finances, they tell a really good story.
Sure.
So there's so many things that we don't unpack, but we will endlessly try to decide why did Mabuza step down, you know,
Right,
when
right.
there's actually reams of data information that we should be unpacking in the interest of citizens' lives. Yeah.
And I guess that feeds into the question of the election, because it's like, oh, the election finished 2 weeks ago, nobody can talk about it anymore, nobody can analyze it.
Yes.
And this is the moment where I think the real data is available to us and we can think more deeply about the election. You've been tweeting, writing about an increased polarization in our politics. Take us through some of your thoughts on what this election means in terms of, you know, the polls moving further apart in some ways in our country.
Yeah, so I wrote about my concern, because we all sort of, like you said, analyzed the numbers and moved on, but you know, it was just a first glance analysis. And there's people out there who are doing in-depth analysis and we should keep following them. But one thing that struck me when I just looked at who had increased their seats in parliament and who had decreased it, was that all the people who had increased their seats in parliament, including new parties, represented special interests or a demographic. So ACDP increased, Freedom Front increased, the EFF increased. Now EFF, you might say they represent all South Africans, but they've also been quite specific in representing a certain kind of South Africans, so that's why I put them in that group. And then Al-Jamaa is a new party. They represent a specific interest. And then there was Good. Now Good maybe represents a lot of people, but particularly I think sort of people who identify with Patricia de Lille would have voted for that. Then there are the parties that try to talk to everyone, the ANC and the DA and even the UDM. And these are parties who have done that not well or well, however you want to argue it, but the fact is they've all tried and they all went down. Now it's tiny shifts, but tiny shifts mean a lot when you're looking at trends. I mean, everyone knew the ANC was going to lose certain metros, just looking at the trends. I don't know why the ANC was taken aback when they lost the metros in the 2016 elections, because the trends were there. It was trending downwards. So that kind of shift does concern me. Oh, and another one that went up, which I don't think a lot of us saw coming, because we were all like, oh, the death of the small parties, was Inkatha Freedom Party, the IFP, which also represents a special interest. And that does worry me about my country, because when I talk internationally about my country, you know, one of the things that I find very interesting is that the majority of people did support the ANC. Or if you want to put the two together, the ANC and the DA. If ethnic politics was important to us, things like the Minority Front would have been a lot bigger, which is the party that represented South Africans of Indian descent. Things like the IFP would have been a lot bigger. Things like the ACDP, given how many of our countrymen identify as Christian, would have been a lot bigger. But they're not, because people seem to want that unity. They seem to want to speak with one voice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, what seems to have happened in this election is that, I mean, some of what are smaller parties did quite well. EFF, you probably can't even put it in that category anymore, in the Freedom Front. But, but then it seems to me that all of these other small parties, many of which did target a specific demographic within the electorate, didn't do particularly well individually, but the cumulative effect of their presence has narrowed the center, as it were. I think that kind of accords.
That's very interesting.
With,
yeah. I like what you're saying, because it also makes me think about the fact that why did that happen? And I think what really scares me is that people are perhaps withdrawing into their corners. Not everyone, but like that idea you have of the narrowing of the center, is that people who are maybe in the center are withdrawing into their what they think is something that will represent their interests. And that's a shift from a narrative that I think has been simplistically dismissed of, you know, the kind of nation-building concept under Mandela. I think people kind of dismiss rainbowism correctly, but there was more to it than that. And I think people are now retreating from that into a kind of politics that we're seeing across the world is very unhealthy, and very dangerous.
I also do think, though, that some blame needs to be put on the parties that occupy the center, because I think if there's any global trend, it's that those parties that once were able to capture imaginations aren't really doing it. And it's actually also incumbent on all parties to be honest about where we are and race in South Africa and the myriad inequalities, and then also excite a multiplicity of potential voters. And I'm not sure anyone's getting that right at the moment.
I think you're so right. Well, I kind of think, you know, the EFF in some ways grew so dramatically because they're coming at it from the outside, where a lot of voters have felt up from the outside, and Fit in Front Plus in their own way as well. But in terms of like mass support, the EFF, and I really feel like at this point I should clarify that they were not in a coalition government before they like knock on my door and shout at me, because they hate that phrase, and I'm always getting told, stop telling us we're in a coalition. But anyway, so just back to the EFF, I do feel like you're absolutely right about the centre having lost its mandate, and I think it's because the capturing of elites. And not the capturing of elite, that sounds so dramatic, but I think it's about how those spaces become very elite and people become very settled in their power. Now, someone whose writing I really missed before he kind of lost the plot a little bit was Andile Matama. I used to always enjoy his writing because, I mean, I didn't identify with him ideologically at all, but I always felt that he had like an outsider view. And I remember when he first became a parliamentarian, he put out an article about how he could not believe how much food he was getting and just how soft this life was. And he was actually worried about himself. And if you think about that shock that he had going into that space, and how some people have been, career MPs whose names we don't even know. And if you go onto, there's a website where you can check their attendance, and their attendance is like 20 to 30% of the committees that they've been assigned to oversee our government, and they're not doing it. So I think the centre has that problem in many countries. Yeah, like the DA right now is their narrative is, look, we're holding the centre, right? I mean, they're not. Right? Sorry, they're not. There's polarization on the left and polarization on the right, and we're doing the unfashionable thing in the centre. And it's like, have you seen those tweets? Because that's not in the centre. I'm actually, can we just sidebar about Belinda Bozzoli very quickly? By all means, take it away, because wow. So yesterday she tried to clarify her tweets, and for the benefit of your viewers, this was the woman who said that parliamentarians singing struggle songs in Parliament were what? I don't know. Yeah, just nationalistic and terrible and just noisy and loud and rude. And the crazy thing was, like, she was like, because the non-vocal parts of it, she was like, she said, now they're talking to the EFF and the EFF are singing back as if this was like some kind of like this is some big symbolic show of nationalism unspoken. It was really, really bizarre. So then a lot of people reacted in complete like shock, like including white people. And I think people were just like, I loved the response of Adrienne Besson, who was like, do sociologists not understand the power of music? Because she's a sociologist, a highly decorated sociologist, like professor, all kinds of things. So then yesterday she tweets a response saying, you all misunderstood me, kind of thing. I'm paraphrasing. Here is an article, it was more of an essay that I've written previously on the dangers of African nationalism. The article will make you angrier than her original tweets. Oh my, I'm too scared to even try to read it. I actually got so angry. I did a little summary for it on the Power website. And one part, she talks about how there can be gentler forms of nationalism, like the Afrikaans people have shown, by using newspapers and books and events. Oh, wow. So Western forms of expression are the way you should express your national pride, is what she's saying. And we're talking in 2019. In 2019, she's saying this. Yeah. And then she speaks about the violence of African expressions of pride, the singing. And I read a column, a very good column on EWN, about just the idea that African music invented the call and response. If you look at it musically, and I'm not a student of music, but this is what this column was saying, and I just loved that, and how it is so complex, and how dare you boil this down without understanding it. Yeah, no, I really agree. I thought that the comments were shameful, and it's like, I don't want to go too hard, because I think there is a genuine battle in the DA that I've certainly witnessed in this journey, and there are a group of people who are actually really fighting, and I think should they succeed, it'll be really good for the DA and probably the country. But like, what is this faction that just like... And who do they think they are is always my question. Like, who do you think you are? Like, so, just to round off this DA thing as well, I think we need to be very clear in our analysis, right? Because I always hear people saying, for this specific faction of the DA, they're tone deaf. I'm like, no. They're not tone deaf. They know exactly what tone they're striking, and they are taking a political decision that is the tone they wish to take. Yeah. Like, don't apologize for the tone, and don't apologize like thank you, like, and make it seem as though, oh no, they just made some tonal mistake. No, they know what they're doing. It's a strategy on their part. Yeah. And that's what kills me. That I just don't understand why it's not being dealt with decisively. Like you say, this kind of like, oh, they made a mistake. No, they didn't. Yeah. I love what you're saying. That they actually have come out, and we know who the people are in the DA who are doing this. And I don't understand, because when you look at the history of the DA, when they decided to stop being a 3%, 4% party and to grow and to go beyond that ceiling, and I always bring it back to the likes of Ryan Coetzee, and there was a document about about breaking the ceiling and the DA growing, they were quite decisive. They were like, sit down, all those former people from the Progressive Party, because the DA was always a broad church who had absorbed all these different parts, including parts of the Nats and all kinds of things. And they made a decision. We're going in this direction of like being a unified party. And so this isn't a new thing of this conservative element and the backlash from it within the DA. But they've been able to deal with it previously, so I don't understand why they can't deal with it now. How much power does Natasha Mazzoni really have? Like, I don't understand why she and the voices we're hearing have that much power.
Yeah, it is concerning. Well, it's going to be interesting to watch all these concurrent battles in both the DA and the ANC play out. If they reach boiling point at the same time, I don't know what we'll all do.
Well, did you hear what James Self said? I feel like this also got so little attention. So James Self is the chair of the DS FedEx. What is the equivalent of that in the ANC?
Yeah,
I guess like the SG.
I don't even know how the whole FedEx process.
Yeah, the FedEx thing is quite. It's hard to understand.
Maybe the
maybe it's like the chairperson. Yeah. So, but like really like quite a top dog. And on the election floor, he told one of our journalists at Power, where I work, Power FM, that they believe that the ANC is not going to last much longer in its current form, that the constitutionalists under Ramaphosa will split away from the capture project under Magashule, and they are preparing themselves to partner with the ANC under Ramaphosa. For me, that was such a huge revelation. We've got it on video that again didn't get unpacked, and I was like, well, they're both on, like you say, on this like, these two pots are boiling, and what's going to happen? Yeah,
wow, imagine that. Wow.
I know. My mind was blown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Verashni, I mean, you really are like a trailblazer in media. Your experience at still a relatively young age within the media landscape is really quite awe-inspiring. And I just wonder, having seen various parts of the South African media, what do you think is going right, and what do you think needs to be focused on for a new era and a new moment in South African politics?
So I have for a long time felt very disillusioned with mainstream South African media, particularly, I don't want to say print media because it's evolved into digital, so written media, because I feel like a lot of our deepest content comes out, or the most in-depth kind of content comes out in the written format, and then the broadcasters kind of take it forward and have the conversations around it. But a lot of the like kind of breaks and investigations happen in that medium.
Sure.
But those places that own that space are just, it's almost close to a monopoly. It's such a non-diversified space in terms of ownership, as well as things like race. I mean, that's just a given at this point. I mean, it's really scary for me how these big companies control so much of the top 10 websites, the top newspapers, and then there is this effect that really dampers innovation. Even from a company like Media 24, which swears by innovation, we're not seeing innovation. We're hearing rumors of more retrenchments coming, like at every company. And of course, I can understand why they do the retrenchments. I can understand why that happens. And I'm getting very deep here because I've been in this industry for so long.
Please
but there's just a lack of imagination, I think, about where we're going. So for a long time, I tried to leave the industry in 2014. I actually resigned from the Mail and Guardian, and I wanted to try to start my own thing because I kept saying, I feel like we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I feel like we're all sinking, because I was going to the World Editors Forum across the world, and I was seeing the numbers, and it was like no one was getting this right. The revenue model was broken. Like, it was not going to get saved. Like, we needed to rethink everything, including how bloated the payroll had gotten in newsrooms. We had come from this golden age of journalism when we dominated things like classified ads. So we got all of that money before you had the Gumtrees of the world.
I didn't realize like journalists are living good. Like, I only realized like the ones at the top. I was like, okay.
We are, I should say. I should own that, because my husband's an engineer, and I'm just like, is that all you guys earn?
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
And people don't know this. They're like,
like my friends who are accountants, I'm always like, what? No, but I should. I mean, it's so distorted because people at the bottom earn very little.
Yeah, right.
And then people at the top, I think the salary scales at different companies, on all companies, need to be looked at. But also, I think lean startups like yours are kind of the future. Lean startups that are actually niche. So when you launch, I was like, I was all up in your DMs, just being like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. Because you kind of like put me to the post because I was hoping to launch my thing, but then I was just like, sit down. No, but I was just like, sit back and watch because this is so good. And for me, it doesn't matter whether there's mistakes or whatever, because the fact is you have that early advantage.
Absolutely.
You started and you're learning. But there's just not enough people taking those risks. And when they do, they get they get taken out by sustainability issues, or I don't know, maybe get absorbed into a big corporate that then kills that innovation and that momentum that they've been building. So I think the titles that are doing the best are ones that are niche and have found a sustainable model. A lot of those have chosen the nonprofit route. So Amabungani, Ground Up, New Frame is the new one that's launched. You know, similar to Ground Up in that it looks at kind of the working class and those kind of issues and social justice issues. Africa Check. So there's a lot of, but there's very few people looking at where kind of tech meets that space. So you guys are doing that nicely. I think Africa Check is also looking at that. They were awarded a grant from Google around AI and using AI functionality to do fact checking, which I think is so exciting. So for me, the biggest innovation is happening in those small spaces, and they can't seem to happen in the big companies. They just can't. So we need to see that shift away from the big companies to the smaller things. I have this ridiculous fantasy I'm going to tell you about one day, which is that basically I have this idea that one day the SABC will just take its enormous budget and just give it to small startups.
Just give it to you and I.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, if you have any ideas,
Because like all these people are struggling for money but doing amazing things on like tiny budgets, and to just say this is public money.
Absolutely.
Have a grant process, give them office space, give them equipment, give them grant. Obviously rigorous process. Yeah.
I mean, we could
like
be
a
the pilot.
idea.
We could be the pilot,
I mean,
and
if you're watching, whoever is the latest CEO,
we'll start the bidding at about R1 billion, I think. So Verashni, just finally, explain.co.za, an interesting new platform which explains things to people.
Yeah, it's kind of all in the name. So the biggest feedback I've gotten from people in my life being a journalist is like super smart people who have like PhDs, like yourself, or you soon will be yourself with a PhD one day. Or people who are even like lecturers or like accountants and actuaries and doctors being like, Verashni, I'm really embarrassed to talk to you because I don't really follow the news. And I was like, it's okay, the news is super confusing. And because of different trends in the news, we're all trying to outbreak each other. So we've given less meaning and less context and just more of like the latest news slices.
So true.
Without understanding and meaning making. So I find that there was a gap in the market for people to really have a place where they could go for like dummies guides. Like I loved what one of the guys in your team said it to me. I've never heard it before, but explained to me like I'm 5, which is apparently a Reddit term. And I'd never heard that before. But exactly that. So people don't feel ashamed. They can just go to explain.co.za and be like, what does a ratings downgrade actually mean? That's a video we're currently working on. So nowhere near the level of a proliferation of videos that you guys are doing, but so it's kind of like getting going slowly. I put out an initial pilot, and now I'm putting plans together to get it being more regular. But yeah, absolutely, to just help people understand the news better and not to feel alienated by terms and concepts or breaking news that they can't put into context in terms of a larger picture.
Well, all the best with that. I think it's a much needed intervention. And look forward to how it unfolds.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me this time. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation.
It was so good, yeah.
And I'm a fan. So subscribe, like seriously.
Likewise.
Subscribe, like it's so cool.
Ayeye, didn't I tell you? It's going to just keep getting so lit. Like, hello. SMWX. No young people are around the decision-making table. Let some new voices come to the fore. Follow us on WhatsApp. Catch us live Tuesdays and Thursdays. Out with the old, in with the new. SMWX.